Hi, welcome back. This is Jim Reavis once again, CEO of Cloud Security Alliance. And for the next session, I'm delighted to welcome Kelsey Nelson, Senior Director of Product Marketing with Wiz. And we're going to try to have an informal, wide ranging discussion about how you balance innovation and risk and sort of what we're seeing now with AI in security and where all of this is going. So, Kelsey, it's a pleasure to have you with me.
Thanks so much for having me, Jim. I'm really looking forward to the conversation today.
Yeah, it's crazy how much in the last 2.5 years our industry and the world, broadly speaking, is getting transformed by generative AI. And Wiz, you just have such a great sort of footprint in the industry, and you see so many different things. See so many different types of customers in different industries, different geographies around the world. So I thought maybe as a starter here, you could just let me know from your perspective, what are the most common AI driven or risks you're seeing? What are the most pervasive things you're seeing, and what are customers really concerned about?
Yeah, we have definitely come a long way over the last few years. I actually personally remember being at a wedding a few years ago and someone showing me, AI generated images and just what's happening here. And I think today, fast forward to today, there is a ton that's happening across the board. And when we think about risks and we think about just AI security in general, kind of my first question that I start with is really understanding which facet are we thinking about from a risk perspective? Are we thinking about new ways that maybe attackers are trying to go after our organizations? Are we thinking about maybe new attack surfaces? If developers are building with vibe coding tools, what does that mean in terms of the velocity at which they're building, but also maybe new attack surface opportunities by using those tools? And then third, also, what's the risk maybe of not using AI within our own organizations? How do we best leverage AI to help accelerate our security teams and think about not just how we help them work faster, but help them, maybe upskill? How do we help them do more with the tools that they have available to them? Since, a common theme that has not changed over the last few years is that resource need that we have from a security standpoint. There's never enough to do everything that we need to do from a threat standpoint.
Yeah, so I see a lot of echoes from the whole cloud journey that we went through as an industry starting a couple of decades ago. And I wanted to kind of get your take on this. We talked a lot about shadow IT as being this thing that would happen since anyone in the organization could take a credit card, get a cloud service, and start purposefully sort of moving production systems over to these new areas. And so, kind of wanted you to maybe give us your thoughts a little bit on some of these things, like shadow IT or shadow AI, and why that's a concern, what it is.
Yeah, I think the mirror of sort of the cloud evolution is a really powerful one. And I think for a few reasons, right? Cloud has fundamentally changed how we build and how we use software today, right? It's not just I can pick something up and maybe test it out, start running with it, maybe plug it into my system, see what else I can do. But it also means that how we're building software is changing too, right? The whole end-to-end system of how we build, manage, deploy, operate tools in the cloud has just completely changed both the speed at which we can go to market, but also the way that we have to think about security. And so before I get to the shadow IT part, I think one piece of this puzzle that's really, really important across that journey is that there's a lot of ways for us to think about visibility and a lot of ways for us to think about how do we really understand across that life cycle, whether it's the first tool a developer is using as they start to go build new software, if it's thinking about how do I maintain these solutions throughout the development pipeline, to someone, like me, or maybe someone, one of my peers in a different part of the business organization saying, "Hey, I want to try this new tool. Let's see if it can help me move faster." There's a lot of this is really centering on this visibility piece. How do I understand what tools are being used? How do I understand what those tools are connected into? And how do I think about really connecting the dots across that footprint? Because I'm sure you know this as well, but there's never any shortage of once we get visibility, then we start to have to get through the deluge of now I have all this insight, but now I have to know what do I need to do, right? And I think the cloud parallel is a really important one. Today, resources are ephemeral, they're being spun up. There's a lot of insights that we might get across that cloud footprint. And so we really have to think about how do we start to prioritize and understand where are the most critical risks. And AI is going to be the same, right? As we start to get more visibility into what workloads do we have that are leveraging AI, where is the data flowing across these different tools, and then start to correlate and say, where are my highest risks and how do I start to tackle those?
Yeah, you mentioned in there, which I think is like a key thing is the shadow IT. It's the usage of this understanding, get that context around it, but also like what proprietary data might be accompanying that AI usage and where that information is going. And like what are you seeing out there in terms of we're in this very much Wild West experimental sort of stage? What are like the typical things that an organization you might uncover with like good visibility that here's how my data is being used with AI in ways that I might not expect.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's going to come down to, do we understand the risks? Do we understand where data might be flowing into these different tools? Right. You just talked a little bit about that. So, do we understand maybe where's that sensitive data training going? How is it maybe being flowed into some of these different AI resources and different AI tools? Are we starting to see maybe where there might be data leakage? Do we have appropriate? Some of this is even going back to security basics and having a strong security foundation. Do we have the right access controls around the systems that are leveraging that data? Are we really thinking about what is the attack chain if someone were to get access to that centralized data source or to compromise maybe the AI resource? Where do we understand where that data is now flowing back into? So it's really kind of getting that picture. Is most organizations that I'm seeing are really starting to just kind of need a map of, do I understand where this data is flowing? Do I understand which tools are pulling from our sensitive data? Then I can start layer on some of the additional controls that we need. And again, a lot of that's going to come down to the same security foundations that we had in the past: posture management, understanding, do we have the right controls around it? Where might there be a vulnerability in that attack chain? And then we can start to prioritize that risk.
Yeah, I think we're gonna build on and circle back to a lot of this, and like you were saying, I think there's a lot of different sorts of organizations, different levels of adoption, different levels of maturity in what they're doing, and I'm finding also that there's a lot of from the very very top mandate to let's go innovate here and let's try and create some disruption in our industry, other things. So, but I wanted to talk a little bit now first. Let's talk a little bit about AI as we see applying it to cybersecurity and the cybersecurity programs. The previous session I did with Stephen Scharf, CISO at BlackRock, we were just talking a little bit high level about good AI to defeat bad AI and all of those sorts of things. And yeah, again, Wiz having such a great breadth of insight into how security programs are being formed and run and sort of what you're seeing organizations plan for the future. I thought we could have a little discussion about like what we're seeing in terms of effective uses of AI for actually strengthening security programs. So love to hear some of your insights and then we can see where we go from there.
Yeah, that sounds great. It's interesting because I think there's a couple of lenses to this. There's a technology lens. So how can I start? Where are opportunities for me to start to maybe unlock the team's time to do other things? How can I help them be more effective at the work that they do? Right. So can I start to correlate, start to surface threats more clearly and more efficiently? But there's also a cultural side of this, and I think that extends certainly from the security team, but also around all of the related teams within an organization. So as I think about kind of both those buckets. On the tool side, there's absolutely opportunity, and you called out kind of organizations on different parts of this journey. There may be that center of excellence saying, hey, from the top down, where can we start to roll out AI? How do we think about AI? And they may be early in that journey and they may be, maybe advanced in that journey. But one of the key questions to start with could be, what processes do we already know well? What processes do we already have pretty clear playbooks around that we can start to automate, that we can start to make faster and more effective with AI? That's a great starting point for many organizations that could be earlier on this journey. And then we can start to layer in some of the more advanced capabilities. Can we start to correlate? Can we start to accelerate? Can we start to upskill and train our teams? There's quite a bit more we can do from a tool standpoint. And then there's the culture side, which I think is equally important as the tools, right? We want to make sure that everyone in our organization, because everyone is a part of the security team at the end of the day, we're all responsible, no matter what our title is, for protecting our organizations from risk. And so if someone on your marketing team, someone on your finance team, or your sales team, or your product team is saying, hey, I'm using AI, asking questions like, how? Can you talk to me a little bit about what you're doing with AI? What processes are you automating with AI? What new insights are you able to derive with AI, to really start to build that culture? And even to your very first question, when we say AI security, what do we mean by that? And building that culture within an organization that helps them understand and articulate, what do I mean by AI? And then we can start to layer on the security practices from there.
So I love the framing of like thinking about this from a cybersecurity professional perspective with a tools aspect and then a culture aspect. And we can't kid ourselves that this is potentially the biggest technology trend we have seen, and it's all encompassing, all consuming, and there are just white hot sorts of opinions about AI, and that some say, hey, it's going to take us to the matrix, or it's going to create this unlimited wealth that's going to automate things, it's going to get rid of jobs, it's going to like do a lot of different things, and it is pretty heated. But it seems as though when we talk about like cybersecurity professionals, and having them lead in something like this and leading in how an organization thinks about this, I mean, don't we want to be sort of in the middle here and be the wise, sort of calm people that say, "Hey, this is what it is. This is how it works. This is where there's can be risks. This is where there's opportunities. Let's go take this like incremental approach." I mean, I'd love your thoughts on like what we should be thinking as a cybersecurity industry in how we think about this. We've gotten a bad rap sometimes, or we've deserved it sometimes. That we're the department that tries to block innovation, and that's or we work like counter to what maybe the CEO wants to do. And so I think we've got an opportunity with this new technology trend to kind of really show the leadership here. But like, what are your thoughts about like what's the best sort of attitude we should have in terms of like the culture we try to build inside of our organizations around AI?
Yeah, I'm smiling 'cause I'm thinking about all the cartoons and memes I see on, on LinkedIn and Reddit about security and AI, that mandate. But then the Department of No, there's always those fun memes around Department of No. But in all seriousness, the CISOs that I talk to, I think one thing I've loved, and this has been true before AI, and I think now is just even more of an opportunity. Then no one wants to be the Department of No. It's not I think a place that folks a mentality that maybe we had to have in order to protect our business, in order to do our jobs, but it's not intended to be adversarial internally, right? And I think many CISOs that I talk to are constantly saying, how do I be a business enabler? How do I help my business move faster? How do I help my business move more effectively, especially in these very competitive markets? And, cloud certainly was a huge wave and an opportunity for us to think differently about how our businesses can reach our customers more effectively, how we can differentiate. And now AI is really giving us unprecedented, I think, from a security standpoint, ability to balance that innovation and security narrative from the ground up because it's moving so fast. Can we help partner with our business counterparts like developers who are moving incredibly quickly, but maybe don't always think about security from the first line of code that they write? And so, can we start to help them be more effective? Can we start to, as a security organization, really lean in on I think, balancing the innovation side? Now's kind of our time. There's never been a better time for us to really take that seat at the table and say, hey, you're right. There is unprecedented opportunity. And that ship is, kind of off sailing, but can we help them do it in a better and more effective way? I think yes. I think now is really the time for us to be that partner. Um, and so I think it's an exciting opportunity. If I was going to take my red or my blue pill, I do think obviously there's always risk. That's our job. We have to think we can't not be worried. That would be not a good place for us to be in. But that said, I think we can kind of balance that risk more so with the innovation side than ever before. What do you think?
Y Yeah, I'm gonna show my age here a little bit. The fact that we're dealing with a technology now that is predictive versus deterministic, that even the scientists that build some of these models, they see these emergent features and they go, wow, I'm surprised, I didn't know it's going to be able to do that. Wow, that's crazy. And all the scaling, I guess, works. That I think we're going to need to learn so much by doing. And like the thing I remember back to is in the old days, and Microsoft's a great friend, so this is like the old days, but there was always the joke that, hey, you buy the version 3 of the tool that came from Microsoft because essentially, the software wasn't built to the same sort of like standards of quality software development life cycle, and you would just get a lot of bugs, and they kind of knew that. We're the whole world is our user base, and so we're going to have all these bugs once it's been released, and we're going to learn things. And I think that now we need to humbly understand that we're going into some new areas. We're going to learn a lot, but that we are also going to see that the world's experiences are going to identify so many more of the vulnerabilities, which is even a struggle to categorize what's a vulnerability in this world versus the traditional deterministic software. And it's through that usage. We want to be careful, but that usage I think is really going to help us like understand the problems and build the guardrails, make them better and better. Just having that corpus of knowledge, and I think you guys are actually in a really good position to help us understand what you are seeing out there.
I mean, I think our threat research team does a ton to start to understand where are we seeing the latest threats? How are we seeing attackers maybe um, are they taking novel approaches, right? There's a lot of interest in understanding what are attackers doing with AI? Are they moving faster? Are they this faster and the ease of access to more resources can certainly extend their impact. And we have to be aware of that. We have to make sure that we're shoring up our foundation. And I don't want to pull away from the fact that that is absolutely critical and we have to constantly stay on the cutting edge. But I also think in kind of taking that approach to your point, we're going to learn a ton and we're going to have to work even more closely with the people building software at our companies so that we can better understand what are the what are the potential risks? What can we do to make sure that we're moving even faster from a security standpoint?
Yeah, and I think that like one of the big challenges in cybersecurity is like the amount of data that gets produced by systems, applications, people, and the telemetry around what is a problem, what is something that might be an incident or an indicator. And I think that that does seem to be something that generative AI really excels at processing large amounts of data, maybe finding the needle in the haystack, maybe correlating things that you might not otherwise find. And I've heard many people say that I'm never writing a like a bespoke compliance report again. I can have the system do it, and then maybe I'll approve it and things like that. So isn't like the amount of data we actually this is actually an opportunity for
Yeah,
cybersecurity to actually do things better.
absolutely. I think you can have all the data in the world, but do we have insight from it? What are we able, as that data volume grows, are we also growing our insights proportionally? And I think AI is, and to your point, Gen AI is really helping us to take from that mass volume of data to start to make more informed decisions, to start to help us move a little bit faster and correlate all of that into insights that we can actually start to respond to, prioritize and respond to, and then bring that context to bear as we remediate.
Yeah, so thinking a little bit more about threats and different things that I think people are concerned about. Wanted to just maybe get your take on a couple of them, few of them. So, like one of them is just this blurring between what's real and what's fake. And there's the deep fakes, obviously, on the image video side, but there's like so many other ways that like AI can create things that will trick people and like supercharged phishing attacks, things like that. Like, what's your thinking about how AI is getting so good that how's that? How do you think that's changing the balance on and the threat vectors we're seeing on this like real versus fake phenomena?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I will say also just looking through my own personal inbox, it's every day. I'm like, wait a minute, hold on. That's not what I thought it was. But they do. They look more and more real. And it is hard to disambiguate what is a threat and what is maybe a genuine email that's coming through or a genuine outreach from someone. And I think this is where I think some of the security foundations are going to help us protect against because threat actors are starting to get better and better and better at some of the traditional attacks that they've had before, right? And so having those security best practices are going to help against some of these particular types of threats. Some of the newer areas around things like weaknesses in AI generated code, weaknesses in vibe coding platforms, default misconfigurations in AI software. These are some of the areas that I think maybe that we need to start to make sure that we have visibility into and that we're starting to set controls on top of those and starting to apply those foundational best practices into this emerging attack surface. So as I think about risk, you're absolutely right. I think attackers are getting better and they're getting smarter at doing the things that they've been doing before even more effectively. And so we have to shore up our security foundations and make sure that we have our best practices truly, truly effective and that we understand kind of our full footprint and that we're kind of closing all of those gaps. But I also think we need to start to extend those into other parts of our attack surface so we can think about that AI generated code, think about those tools that we're using, how we configure them properly. Do we have agents that are over permissioned or that have too much access to different resources or too sensitive data? And that's where I think some of the attack surface and some of the risk really starts to emerge that maybe we need to be thinking even more about.
Yeah, and I like how you're sort of saying that and framing that, that like the basics, getting back to basics, or maybe like first principles
Yes,
are things
absolutely.
that we can really like understanding what a risk is, understanding what a vulnerability is, understanding the education, the awareness that we need to do in an organization. All of those things I think are like really important in how we like kind of build that next generation cybersecurity team, and also just like the next generation organization that's like leaning into AI and being as efficient as possible. So like hopefully we'll find that a lot of the lessons learned that we've had in the past will be very applicable to this.
Yeah.
So you did mention one word that slipped out that I have to call you on that now we need to talk about, and as
Okay.
you said agents, and
Oh,
so we
I
hadn't
got
mentioned that yet. So but that certainly that's promising to be like the word of the year. Certainly next year, it's trending to be that way. You know, this idea of AI operating with agency, with autonomy, and things like that. And so any sort of like take you want to provide on agentic, certainly that's where I think we're talking about. You're going to get a lot of that productivity, that automation there, but certainly there's some unknowns there, and what the actual guardrails we need for all of that.
Yeah. And I think again, as we think about agents, are we looking at agents we can deploy on behalf of our security team or agents that we're building? There's a lot of different flavors or different ways that we can leverage agents or that we need to think about agents from a security standpoint. And so I think from a internal standpoint, we've as professionals, we've always needed there's never enough resources, right? We talked about this earlier. There's always more that we can do, and so looking at agents as ways to start to extend our workforce and start to think about ways that can help me as a security professional be more effective at my job. That's what you were calling out with things like, can we start to identify those threats more efficiently? Can we start to have them help take on some of the automated remediation efforts? If we know that these are misconfigurations, can they go make that correction? Can we start to where can we start to take action and where can we start to trust the agents to either surface the most important threats? Are we looking at what automations can they take over on our behalf and do for us so that we can be more efficient? There's a ton of opportunity there. And I think we're just starting to scratch the surface because the stakes are high, right? With agents rolled out on behalf of security professionals, we have to be really thoughtful about what actions do we want them to do? What actions are we comfortable with them doing? So I think as we continue to mature and start to have those agents pick up more and more and more and learn more about our particular workflows, I think we'll start to see, hopefully accelerate and really help us cover that entire cloud and AI footprint that we now have growing very, very quickly around us. But also, I do think we have to also think from a security standpoint about the agents our teams are building, right? Don't forget about what data does that agent that your team is building have access to? Is it sensitive data? Have we thought about the permissions that are around that agent? I know we've talked a bit about the developer side, but I really think it's important for us to think about as we're building that we make sure we're building with the right guardrails in place for those different tools. So it's kind of a twofold there.
Yeah, I think like developers, like you said, that seems to be like the sector that's moving the quickest, and also like very good point that there's a lot of different types of agents that are out there that people are trying to build, like your personal agent or more of like workflow process agent. And I think it's really important that we because there isn't like a really good like I think catalog of the best practices because we still are trying to get some lessons learned. But I've got a sense that we want to like really have agents that are simple, that we can get them working really well, and then have them get federated into like more of these multi agentic implementations. And someone at a event just a couple weeks ago, they said, you know, we've always talked about this principle of least privilege in how we do things like zero trust, and we'll probably need to start like doing agents at scale in what we call the privilege or the principle of least autonomy, where you crank up the autonomy as you gain more confidence in the capability and the guardrails and
Yeah.
everything else that's happening there.
It's like a composable intelligence, right? I can ascribe each of these agents with a specific area of ownership or a specific set of tasks, and then as that agent becomes more I gain more confidence, maybe I have them take on more, combine forces with a couple of different ones to take on maybe a bigger project. I think it'll be a trust exercise, especially as this technology matures and also our workflows mature, right? We have to think about different things and our teams have to work differently. And so it's going to be a people side too as we think about how do we best leverage these resources in our ongoing workflows.
That's great. The Kelsey, the time here has just flown by. I'm just looking at
Oh,
the
oh
clock.
goodness.
We're already like we're reaching the limit here, but I wanted to give you just like sort of a final thoughts like area, and I want to leave it kind of open ended. When I interview a lot of AI people and ask them what's going to happen in the future, there it's very hard. So you're welcome to talk about where things are going, but also if any of these areas about AI for security, where organizations are, any sort of final thoughts that you have or tips or anything else you'd like to give to organizations pondering the conversation we've had today on things they should be thinking about or doing. Love for you to share that.
Yeah, I think I would love to be able to see the future a little further out. That would be there's a lot going on. It's moving fast. I think you and I talked a little bit about kind of that first principles and experimentation. And I think now is a really important time for us to be kind of balancing both of those. And so, where I'd leave folks with is really thinking about how do I continue on the first principle side? What are how don't forget that importance of foundational security, right? We've learned a lot. The OWASP top 10, there's been some shifts, but there are some common themes in there that persist year over year over year that we need to make sure that we're thinking through and that we're protecting against as we continue to build more and more software as we think about the role that AI plays in software development and what that means for our cloud estate. And so just continuing on that first principles approach is going to set you up for a really strong foundation wherever this world may go. But I also wouldn't be shy about starting to experiment, right? Those agents, there is a lot more that we can do. And I think we're just starting to scratch the surface on what those agents could do within a security standpoint. And so now is a really great time to think about what are those workflows that you, again, have really well documented that might be a good place for an agent to take over. And so you can start to put your team's resources on different tasks, tasks that are more complex, tasks that are going to be a lot more challenging to think through and get into the depths of. And so looking at for places where you can start to automate and start to or to your point, start to bring in that vast amount of data to bring those insights faster. Now is a really great time to start to experiment and really see where can you start to drive better outcomes for your team and help them work smarter. So that's I think where I'd leave you with Jim.
Well, I really appreciate your insights, Kelsey, and I think you left it at like a really good way. This is the time for cybersecurity to experiment to enable their organization. So we appreciate Wiz's partnership with Cloud Security Alliance. Kelsey, appreciate your expertise here in this event. So thank you.
Thank you so much.